there's a little example I've done many, many times, and some of you have seen this before. It involves some genogram slides. Genograms is a tool that helps us in family therapy to outline a map, if you will, not only the family and the people and the structure, but the relationships between individuals. I just want to give you a quick little snapshot of 3 different potential step family configurations. This is not everything. We've done the math. There's 67 different potential step family configurations based on background and different individual dynamics and variables. But let me just show you a few. So here's a story about Rick and Cindy. They were married for 18 years. They had 2 kids, Amy and Amanda, but Rick was tragically killed in a car accident. Cindy has since remarried. She married Larry. She's pregnant now with a child. It's on its way. So they're going to have 3 kids in their blended family. Now, just a quick little observation about the structure of this particular home. So this family has 2 adults going to parent those 3 kids, Cindy and Larry. You can see there's 3 sets of grandparents. Of course, Rick's parents are still invested in the lives of their grandchildren, Amy and Amanda. Here's a question. So Rick's parents, I'm sure they still want to be involved in Amy and Amanda's life. But when the new baby comes along, I wonder how much of an attachment, an emotional connection they will experience with that child. That's to be seen, right? And then there's Cindy. What if she doesn't want Rick's parents involved in her new child's life for some reason? Well, I guess she has that power and that ability, which would put them at a real difficult place. Cindy's parents are going to be invested in all 3 kids, I would think. Larry's parents are going to be invested for sure in their biological grandchild. What about their step-grandchildren, Amy and Amanda? They're teenagers. What if Amy's life and schedule and interest just doesn't include Larry's parents? Doesn't include Larry. Amy gets to make that decision, right? On behalf of herself and how close she is, how much she trusts and opens herself to Larry. I just think about that for a minute. There's some complex things going on, even in this little one household blended family. Let me show you another possible configuration. So here's Jason and Katrina. They're dating at this period of time. They had a child together when they were dating, never married. They're not together anymore. Now Jason is dating Alicia. So they're coming to you for pre-blended family counseling. They're thinking about getting married. We need to stop and just think about the complexity of this for a second, and how would we help Alicia and Jason get ready for that blended family. Notice Alicia was married before to Scott, and they divorced, but they didn't have any children, so Scott's probably out of the picture, but maybe not completely. His parents, maybe not completely. Alicia's parents, obviously invested in her. Jason's parents, you notice there was a divorce there long ago. He grew up with a stepmom and a stepdad, so that's a normal part of his life. How invested are they going to be in Tamara? Well, that's their granddaughter, so I guess they're going to be very invested in Tamara. Katrina is still the biological mother. So if Jason marries Alicia, we're going to have now 3 adults parenting this one child in 2 different households. The last scenario, we had just 1 household. We got 2 households, Jason and Alicia's and Katrina's household. That's more complex, more adults, more parenting opinions. There's more to coordinate between households. Tamara has a life back and forth. And then there's new grandparents involved and step-grandparents involved. Wow. Okay, let me do another one. This one's far more complex. So here's Susie and John. They met, married, fell in love, had 3 kids, Mary, Mike, and John Jr., but as life would have it, they divorced. In another part of the universe is Bob and Betty. They too met, fell in love, had a couple of kids, Ted and Carrie. They too divorced. Since that time, Betty has married again. Frank, he's now the stepdad to Ted and Carrie. Bob and Susie have gotten married. They're coming to your church. They're attending on a regular basis. They have 5 children between the 2 of them. Now, think about the households just for a second. We got Betty and Frank's household. We got Bob and Susie's household and John's household. That's 3 households. We have 5 adults. You want to talk about coordination of parenting? That gets more complex. We have 3 different households trying to coordinate with 5 people parenting over 5 kids. But there's more than that. When Susie married Bob, of course, she got a mother-in-law and a father-in-law, but what she didn't quite fully understand is she was going to get what I like to call an ex-wife-in-law. An ex-wife-in-law? What does that mean? Well, Betty certainly has a whole lot of power and influence over what happens in Bob and Susie's life. Well, how so? Well, no, she doesn't live in the home. She doesn't clean the kitchen, that's for sure. And she certainly doesn't help pay their bills. But Betty can pick up the phone and make a phone call and put Bob in a really bad mood. I mean, there's a reason they're not married anymore, and that reason as tends to happen, continues long after the divorce is over. That's why I like to say divorce doesn't end family life, it just reorganizes it, and the dynamics pretty much stay the same. So she picks up the phone, she calls Bob, she puts him in a bad mood, whatever the topic is, money, issues, kids, parenting, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, Bob's in a bad mood, and that spills over to how he's treating Susie, how he's responding to Susie's kids. Mary walked in innocently making a comment, and Bob kind of snipped at her. Why? Because he was in a bad mood because of something that just happened with his former wife. Yeah, Betty's an ex-wife-in-law to Susie. Betty can change their finances. She can, their schedule. She can say, no, I can't pick up Carrie after school today. Something's come up. And Bob's got to scramble. He's got to call Susie. She's going to scramble. And their schedule changes. Seems like what happens between these households has a lot of impact. Well, Bob has an ex-husband-in-law. Turns out who John is as a biological dad to his 3 kids has a whole lot to do with whether or not Bob, as their stepfather, can find his way in. I mean, all John has to do is say, kids, look, I'm your dad. He's not. Don't listen to him. Listen to me. Like, him, but don't love him. And that sends a message that's pretty strong, right? Be loyal to me. And so all of a sudden, John Jr.'s got a little bit of an attitude towards his stepdad, Bob. And no matter what Bob does, no matter how many times he comes to your men's Bible class on Sunday morning at your church, that doesn't help him break through, because John has a whole lot to do with his success as a stepfather. Well, there's more, of course, to this. Susie has primary custody of her 3 kids. They spend most of their time with their mom and now their stepdad, but every other weekend and 6 weeks in the summer, they're spending time at their dad's house. Betty and Frank have primary custody of Ted and Carrie, but on occasion, Bob and Susie have all 5. How does this influence them when they're at church? Sometimes it's a really big family showing up. Sometimes it's a little smaller family showing up. Not all the kids are there all the time. But there's more, of course, to this whole scenario. Bob's got parents, and Susie's parents just went through one of those, what we call, silver divorces. They were married for 30 years, and she was out of the home. All her siblings are out of the home. By the way, we not putting the siblings and the cousins on this genogram because, wow, we don't have enough room. But her parents have just gone through this breakup, and the family is reeling over that, and she and her brother and sister are trying to figure out how to navigate this space, and what does that mean for them? And it turns out that her parents have recoupled already, like something's happening there. And now she's got, what, stepdad? I don't have a stepdad. I don't need a dad. Like, I don't even know what to call the guy. It's mom's husband. That's all I know. And I don't even know how to get along with him. We don't have anything in common. So she, in her mid-40s, is trying to navigate that space, which is weird. Well, in the meantime, we've got John, of course, his parents. Betty's parents divorced when she was very young. She grew up in a stepfamily, so she really sort of gets a lot of this stuff. Frank's parents as well. So let's do the math real quick. 5 kids, 3 different households, 5 adults, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sets of grandparents. That's 14 grandparents. Can you imagine birthdays? Getting everybody together around Thanksgiving or Christmas, navigating schedules across households between all these people, some of whom want to see the kids or maybe want to see some of the kids and not really sure about all of the kids. And what about those traditions that we used to always do every Christmas morning, but now we can't do because Mary, Mike, and John Jr. are going to be at their dad's house? It changes a lot. And the changes just keep rolling. But that's just schedule and life. What about relationships? Bob and Susie have a marriage. Most of our premarital counseling only focuses on this relationship in this big family picture here, Bob and Susie's marriage. We're going to come back to premarital counseling in a little bit, but they also now instantly, from the moment they get married, have to navigate space as a couple, as parents. One's a parent, one's a step-parent to each of the other's kids. That's a whole new dynamic. Betty and Frank are also kind of bonding their marriage and also trying to figure out how to be parents. Now, Betty and Bob, as co-parents, former spouses, still have to work together regarding Ted and Carrie and make decisions together, and that's a whole dynamic in and of itself, as is Susie's and John's. So we notice all these little circles are connected, right? So what happens between Susie and John ripples into Susie and Bob's relationship, what probably has some impact even back into the 3rd household with Betty and Frank. It can go on and on any direction, and the ripples are always connected. We have Ted and Carrie, that's a sibling group. We have another biological sibling group, Bob and his kids, he was a single dad for about 3 years. So, they have rituals and history and tradition, and they've been through hard things together. And there's a whole bunch that's wrapped up into that story. Susie and her kids have the same sort of thing happening, but now Bob's trying to wrap Susie into this narrative where Susie is now a part of what he has with his kids. And she's trying to do the same as it relates to Bob and her kids. Well, let's talk about relationships and that attachment issue, that emotional connection that, when it's your biological children, between Bob and his kids, for example, and Bob and his parents, that biological relationship is so deep. It is blood deep. It is soul deep, if I could say it that way. You have time, history, last name shared, everything, all that stuff is just wrapped up in the moment that child is born into your life. You love them, they love you. End of story. There's no ambiguity. There's certainty and definition into those biological relationships. What's new are the yellow relationships on your screen, Bob and Susie. Now, they're going to be the heads of their family and navigate that space together, but they're the youngest, if I could say it that way, relationship among all of the older biological, never going away relationships. Don't you think that might create some challenge? Actually, it does. Well, there's a step relationship that's developing with Bob between he and his stepchildren. But of course, that happens in concert with their relationship with their dad, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. Susie's, again, trying to get to know some new people in her world. Ted and Carrie, biological relationship with mom and with dad, but now developing step relationship with stepmom and stepdad. All those things are intersected with one another and impact and ripple into one another. They have bio relationships with grandparents and developing step relationships with step grandparents. And on the day that they get married, everything we've just begun to talk about happens all at once. They're not just navigating marriage, they're navigating all of it. Now, I just want you to sit and take that in just for a second. Essentially, this is the why of blended family ministry. Blended families are exponentially more complex than biological families, and they lack clear definition. There's a great deal of ambiguity on day one that has to be resolved so their family can get a sense of familyness, I like to say, and cohesiveness and harmony. And until that definition comes, they really are just sort of wandering, beginning to try to figure out that space. And that's where a lot of conflicts come and a lot of difficulty comes. And so there's opportunity and there's challenge in the midst of that, what we call integration process. The opportunity is putting on Christ and trying to live out his kingdom principles in the midst of confusing and difficult dynamics. The challenge is that most people fall prey to those dynamics, and with each successive generation, we find that walking with Christ and obedience becomes more and more difficult. Blended family ministry starts with raising your awareness about this complexity